Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national broadcaster Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations and key concepts and ideas that drive India's conduct and behavior in the world. Viewers, in this episode we are going back in time to take a close look at ancient Indian strategic thought. India, as you know, is a civilizational power with a dense volume of writing and thinking and praxis on strategy, statecraft, warfare, peace, order, power, all these concepts going back for more than 2 millennia. So, we are going to be talking about all these ideas that have shaped India as a civilizational power over the millennia and how the past still reflects in India's present and potentially future conduct. That is the main theme of the show. And to discuss this, I am very privileged to introduce you to an eminent scholar of international relations, Dr. Amrita Narlikar. Dr. Narlikar is Distinguished Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. She used to be President of the German Institute for Global and Area Studies and has taught at Cambridge University and has written widely about ancient Indian strategic thought. Dr. Narlikar, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Dr. Narlikar, you have recently written a very interesting essay, an occasional paper called Shastra Niti, Shastra Niti, and you have laid out some of the key precepts that have guided Indian strategic thought over the centuries. And one of the points you make at the outset in the essay is that as India is rising contemporarily right now and reclaiming its status as a major power in the world or a leading power in the world, it is becoming more self-aware, you say. So, this is something I think our audiences would like to know to start with. What is the link between becoming more aware about our roots, our heritage, our strategic tradition and the contemporary rise, because we are talking about things that were written and said thousands of years ago. What's the link between that and 21st century India and its return or rise to the top tier of the international order?
Thank you very much. That's a great question to set the ball rolling. If you go back just to, a couple of decades ago, go back to 1992, and there was an essay that was written by George Tanham in which he said that Indians have not been great strategic thinkers or developers of strategy. Yeah, and this prompted a huge debate on why is there no Indian strategic thought. Now, our scholars didn't just sit back, they responded to this. But the response, even in the 1990s, was a defensive one. So the response was along the lines of, oh, look at what Prime Minister Nehru used to say, and was that a form of realism or was that a form of idealism? So the reference point remained very much concepts that were developed in the West. Now, and it was almost as if we started thinking maybe during colonial times strategically at best, and then we started thinking a little bit more when we became independent. But that's just not true, right? Because we have ideas, we have strategic thought that goes back to millennia. And you ask me the very pertinent question on how does this link up with rising power? And we see this. Now, I'll give you just one example. In 2015, Prime Minister Modi came to Germany and he gave a speech. And in the speech, he said, protecting the environment comes naturally to Indians. You do not need to lecture to us on how to deal with climate change or protect the environment. Now, this was a very different way in which he framed the discussion, because up till then, we used to be along with many countries from the global south, we would say to the West, you developed, you burnt your coal, now it's our turn to develop, you let us develop now. Now, with India's rise, we've moved that debate. Now we've made the environmental protection agenda homegrown, right? And that homegrown characteristic comes from our ancient past. And so in that speech, PM Modi referred to verses from the Atharva Veda. And that showed the beautiful link between modernity and India's ancient past.
Yeah, and in fact, viewers, you will be also interested in recapping. Prime Minister Modi recently talked about a 10-year challenge to overcome the mental slavery of the Western constructs from Thomas Babington Macaulay from 1835 to 2035. It's a 200 years of the colonial project, and how we need to decolonize the knowledge systems and regain pride in our own heritage, because that is how we will rise again. He used a word in Hindi, Dr. Narlikar. He said heen bhavana, meaning the sense of inferiority that has been ingrained for since in the post-independence period. We need to overcome that. It's until we do that, we will not have the confidence to rise. That was what he was saying.
Absolutely spot on, right? And this is sort of what I mean when I say that even in the reactions that we give to the West, it used to be very defensive, right? So it would still be reference to Western frameworks. And I'll give you just one more example. I was the president of a big research institute in Germany for 10 years, and I would repeat it, and sort of experts on South Asia. Now, I would ask them, what do you know about Indian political thought? What do you know about Indian strategic thought? And the response was, at best, okay, that's the best response. It was, oh, we've heard of the Indian Machiavelli. Yeah. Now, if somebody was saying this in 1929, as he did, there was an article on the Indian Machiavelli, we might accept this. But to speak about Kautilya as the Indian Machiavelli when he was writing about 2,000 years before Machiavelli, and that's just ridiculous in this day and age.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's much that we have to reclaim, and also to educate the rest of the world, and that is part of the attempt here in this show. Dr. Narlikar, you already spoke about Kautilya or Chanakya, and he is often considered to be an exponent of realpolitik, but at the same time there is a strong moral and ethical component in Kautilya's Arthashastra. And you've also referred to the Mahabharata, the ancient Indian text, and there also you give a lot of examples where the so-called interests and the values are combined in the Indian strategic tradition, and they are not necessarily seen as divergent from each other, or you only follow power politics, or you only follow kind of pure moral impulses. It's a combination of the two, and for lack of a better phrase, I'm using the Western terminology here. Maybe it's a kind of a unique kind of a moral realism that you have been talking about, that stands the Indian strategic thought apart from other traditions. Would you like to talk a bit about this blend of interests and values and give some examples maybe from our epics?
Absolutely. So just one thing that I should say is that I think we've done ourselves a disservice by allowing people to think about Indian strategic thought as comprising only Kautilya, and therefore that realist strand in Indian political thought. And that's why I think the Mahabharata is very interesting, because it does it's much more complex. It's not, and it's a living text, right? Those traditions are very much alive today, unlike the Kautilya, unlike the Arthashastra, right? If you stopped somebody on the street and you said to them, can you tell me what the Arthashastra says? They probably won't be able to tell you. But if you ask them, do you have a view on how Arjun fought in the Mahabharata? Now, or what do you think about Karna, one of the heroes? They'll have views on this, right? And this is what I mean by our living traditions. Now, this is a very living, long-standing tradition of strategic thought. Now, would I call it moral realism? Now, and you identify one of the contributions of our strategic thinking very correctly, that it's, we don't accept that dichotomy between interests and values. Right? And I think this is a false dichotomy. It's not very useful. It's pervasive in many schools of international relations, bar constructivism and a couple of others. But the mainstream is either you pursue interests or you pursue values. And that also translates into the world of policy in the West, right? So you will have foreign ministers, European foreign ministers who will speak about value-oriented diplomacy as opposed to interest-oriented diplomacy. We have had German foreign ministers who've done this in the recent past, right? And what the Mahabharata does is something quite different, right? But I won't, let me not refer to the Western frame here of moral realism. Instead, let me refer to that wonderful concept of dharma. No? And dharma, or dharma as some people call it, but it's dharma. Dharma, it refers to many different things depending on the context. It can be religion, it can be charity, it can be duty. But at in a fundamental sense, it's about order and justice, right? So, and within this concept of dharma, now it's Bhishma is asked in the Mahabharata, what is dharma? Is this dharma in the Mahasabha, where Draupadi asks him this question, and Bhishma responds saying, dharma is subtle, right? But you then look through the text, you read through the text, and you realize actually we get quite a good deal of clarity in what is dharma. And without going into the subtleties, I'm just going to refer to two concepts within this. Now, one is swadharma, and the other is sadharan dharma. Now, swadharma is your duty within the social order. And this is when Arjun puts down that great battle of the Mahabharata in Kurukshetra. Our hero Arjun looks upon all the elders, his kinsmen, his teachers on the opposite side, and he puts down his bow and arrow and says, I will not fight. Na yotsya. Now, I will not fight this war. Even if we win, how could we enjoy the fruits of such a victory? Right? And then we have Lord Krishna, who gives him the divine sermon, the divine song, the Bhagavad Gita, the divine song. And when Krishna is trying to persuade Arjun why he needs to fight, why he should pick up that bow and arrow and fight, the first set of arguments relates to swadharma. Now, and Krishna tells Arjun, you are a warrior. This is your duty. Now, if you give up on your duty right now, you will put yourself in peril and put many others in great jeopardy, right? And he says, swadharme nidhanam shreyaha paradharmo bhayavaha. Now, you must follow your swadharma, your duty. You must avoid following the path of other people's duties. Follow your duty. Then it becomes clear that Arjun is not going to get persuaded by this. Now, he's being told the fruits of victory will be yours. If you win, you will enjoy the earth. If you die, you will enjoy heaven. Tasmat uttishta kaunteya yuddhaya krita nishchayaha. Now get up and fight. And Arjun is not getting persuaded. And then Lord Krishna appeals to sadharan dharma. And he tells, and this is the beauty of the sermon, when he reminds Arjun about how the equality of the soul, right? The equality of all human beings, and the equality of all more than human beings and human beings, that all of us, all the beings of the earth, are one, right? And how can you believe in death when the soul is undying? And he who looks upon all creatures as he looks upon himself, he's the one who really understands, right? And that is sadharan dharma. You bring the two together and you get a very special mix of allowing us to pay attention to both interests as being pushed by swadharma and values, sadharan dharma, right? If you go only with swadharma, you get the that set of arguments can be misused.
Right. Dr. Narlikar, you have also commented on the core issue of going to war and using force, because this is always the central question in statecraft. And on this issue, your reading of Indian strategic thought, distilled from many texts, is that it's neither jingoistic nor pacifist. And you are saying that it depends on circumstances, war is to be used in last resort, and there are also paths to peace and diplomacy to avoid war that need to be exhausted. And even when you're fighting war, then there are limitations to how you can carry it. So this is the whole the question about strategy, right? Like, and even today we find shades of it. Is this some kind of a middle path that you're talking about, middle ground between extreme militarism, as we would call it today, or complete pacifism. You're saying that there are a whole range of possibilities between these two extremes, and that is what the Indian tradition has always been about. So your comments on this, please.
Spot on, very well put, actually. And so, again, Western and that understanding of India always sort of seems to go through these pendulum swings, right? So on the one hand, India is all about ahimsa and extreme pacifism, right? And then, again, an example from Germany. Somebody, like, I was giving a talk on the Mahabharata, and then somebody came to me and was really shocked and said, so Krishna does not stop Arjun from going to war. That's what he should have done. Now, how can you agree with a warmongering text? And the Bhagavad Gita is not warmongering at all, right? And so the war of Kurukshetra comes after many attempts have been made to reach a peace. And the Udyog Parva is very much about this, but many of the Parva before then, Yudhishthira is being repeatedly goaded to go to war by Draupadi, by Bhim, right? Saying, you're a warrior. How can you accept the life of a hermit? You're living in the forest now. What are you doing? And Yudhishthira is very careful, and he says, no, we will, and he gives several reasons why you don't go to war. Now, one of them is strategic, very strategic. If you attack now, we do not have a position of strength. We will not attack now. Now, it's also moral. Now that if you do the right thing, you will win. But ultimately, war is a measure of last resort. But when it comes, it has to be seen through, right? And that is what the Bhagavad Gita is also telling us. So when Arjuna is standing facing the Kaurava army and saying, I'm not going to fight, Krishna gives him a very clear lesson on why he needs to. But one of the important points here is of Nishkam Dharma, right? And so it's a line that many of us have also been taught as school children, right, when we were in school, which is karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, that you have the rights to your action, but not the fruits of your action, right? And so this is, again, where even when you're taking military action, you bear this in mind. Now, the idea of just war is very important. So it's not that India is going to be forever war-averse. Now, but the idea is that it will fight for a just cause. And that's different from being militaristic. And that's very different also being peaceful for the sake of being peaceful. Right? We're not going to abandon our national interests.
Right. Yeah, and one sees shades of this in the way we deal with our adversaries, Pakistan and China, where we've always wanted to avoid war, but when it is thrust upon us, we have fought back. So indeed, this is I think quite relevant. Dr. Narlikar, let me take you to this realm of alliances and partnerships, what we call strategic partnerships today. Very much as bread and butter of the Indian foreign policy even today. But going back in time, our strategic thinkers all were of the view that building of alliances or partnerships is critical for victory and for conquest and for the empire to grow and all these things. So one of the things I noticed in your writings is you have argued that there is a strong what you call non-dualistic tradition in the way we approach friendships or partnerships or alliances. And you said that's why sometimes the world gets surprised as to why are we with Russia but also with the United States, which are of course at loggerheads with each other. And sometimes many around the world seem to be puzzled by why India is doing this. But you are drawing a line between contemporary conduct and going back to this idea of non-dualistic friendships. So let's talk a bit about our ancient texts and our ancient wisdom on this aspect of partnerships and why we may actually be pally with contrasting types of kings or kingdoms or empires.
Right. And so one thing that's worth clarifying at the outset is, whether it was non-alignment, India leading the non-aligned movement, or now with multi-alignment, people have accused India of being neutral and assume that India does not like alliances because it's not, for example, a part of NATO. right? And I just want to clarify that the ancient texts are very clear on this, that alliances, like you also just said right now, are key, right? They are, and alliances of different types. We also see instances where alliances are formed under highly asymmetric conditions, right? Even the Mahabharata itself is a product of a mighty alliance between Ved Vyas, who has composed the Mahabharata in his head, but needs a scribe to write it down for him. And only one scribe is capable of this mammoth task, and it is Lord Ganesha. Right. And that is and there is a bargaining. Now there is a bargaining process that ensues between the god Ganesha and Ved Vyas, and a deal is struck. Right. So alliances are key. One thing that I will add to, I'll just come to your question in a second on the non-dualistic tradition. One other thing that I think I should mention is that what is also clear is we don't get blind faith, blind allegiance. Right? So we see this in the case of the Mahabharata, where Dhritarashtra epitomizes this blind loyalty that he has towards sons, and especially Duryodhan, right? And that does not play out well for the Kauravas, right? The blind king Dhritarashtra is blind, not only physically blind, but it shows that he's also blinded by his love and loyalty for his sons. Right? And so what we are being repeatedly told is think for yourself. Decide for yourself. And that actually also fits very well with the way we pursue strategic autonomy. Now that we are not blindly going to follow alliances. But now coming to that very important point that you raised, Dr. Chaulia, on non-dualism, right? The non-dualistic tradition in India ensures that othering does not come readily to us, right? We don't make pariahs for no reason. We don't shoo countries out of the room. Now that's just not what we do. That's not what we're about, right? And alliances are also based on history of cooperation. History matters, right? And so again, we see this in the Mahabharata when Arjun chooses Lord Krishna. Without his armies, he chooses the person of Lord Krishna. Now, because there is a long history of trust there. And Duryodhan gleefully accepts the armies. Now, Duryodhan does not win the war. Arjun's side does. Now, Arjun selects well. He bears in mind that history of trust that he has with Lord Krishna. And so trust matters, long-standing relationships matter. And above all, this non-dualism matters. So the West is then very surprised over the Russia-Ukraine war, and there was real disappointment. I was in Germany at the time when the war had broken out, and there was real disappointment on how on earth could India not be condemning Russia, right? And if the West had taken any interest in how Indians think, where we're coming from, where our strategic thought is coming from, perhaps they would not have been so surprised.
Absolutely. So it's not just the contemporary tactical needs, it's something deeper, viewers. That's what Dr. Narlikar is saying. Dr. Narlikar, we are almost out of time, but on the question of human rights, which of course has become one of the big trope of our times in the especially in the liberal discourse, you have made an interesting point that the Indian ethos is more liberal than even Western variants, and that on climate, on the environment, on compassion towards all living beings. You have said that it's not just the intergenerational justice, which is a human to human concept, but it also involves interspecies justice and equity and these sort of things. How can we mainstream these Indian ideas on human rights, on environment, and on nature, so that we can overcome the planetary crisis today? I mean, every year we have these COP summits, and we have just seen one in Brazil, and there are going to be many more, but they don't seem to be getting to the bottom of the problem because there is no mindset change. And our prime ministers argued for one through the life movement, lifestyle for the environment and so on. But do talk a bit quickly about these traditions of ours and how they could potentially be solutions to the challenges of today.
Okay, this is a very important issue. And so if we think about human rights, and most people, the debate is, they're universal, meaning Western human rights that respect the individual, or there's an Asian variant of human rights which respects family and society, right? But India gives us a very different story. Now, and in India, we have respect for the individual, not just family and society. Now, so we are not that Asian version. We're much more than that so-called Asian version, but respect for the individual across species. All lives matters, human and more than human, right? The planet matters. And so we see this in several stories. There's a very interesting debate between Jajali and Tuladhar, right? And Tuladhar points to the extreme abuses of animals in farming, agriculture. Now think about EU-India trade negotiations. And in this case, the EU always adopts the high moral ground. And India has been at the receiving end of sermons from the EU on environmental standards. But actually, look at farming practices, industrial farming practices in the EU, and they're horrific, right? There is no care about animal welfare or animal rights. Now, wouldn't it be great if both the EU and India were to take a leaf out of that discussion between Tuladhar and Jajali, and which talks about respect for animals and animal rights, no? And so this idea, Tudhaiva Kutumbakam, that has been it's being used almost like a mantra, right? And people think it means all the peoples of the world belong to one family, and that's not what it means. What it means is the entire earth is one family, right? And so Udara Charitanam tu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, to the generous minded, the entire earth is a family. That idea is very deeply embedded in our traditions, right? And so I grew up with the idea of Atmavat Sarvabhuteshu Yah Pashyati Saha Panditaha. He who looks upon all beings as he looks upon himself, he is the truly wise one. So if we want to make the world a Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we have to pay more attention to the rights of the rivers, to the rights of the forest, to the rights of every single individual animal.
Dr. Narlikar, I'm afraid I'm out of time, but viewers, the point is ours is a civilization that has always prided itself in mother nature, the idea of nature as a mother and all of us as children, all of us being not just the humans, but all living forms. And therefore, as Dr. Narlikar is saying, we have a wider conception of human rights and of environment, and if those ideas were to be mainstreamed, we would be probably better off. Let me thank Dr. Narlikar for sharing, very unique insights into the Indian psyche going back millennia, and also the carry forward of some of those ideas into contemporary times. Dr. Narlikar, thank you for this research, and I think we have to do more work on culture and how it is, not just sticky in terms of continuity, but also capable of bringing about change in the contemporary world order. Thank you so much, and great writing. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chaulia.
Viewers, the point is India has a very, very old tradition of strategic thinking and strategic wisdom, and those concepts need to be brought back, not just because India is rising and because we feel emboldened as a result of what our ancestors said, did or wrote, but also because this is good for the world, and many of our ideas are balanced, moderate and middle of the road. So what that means is that India has avoided extremities. What we are talking about is a different type of world order where everybody has a chance and everybody has a voice and a say, and that is the Indian ethos. So do think about the past and the present and how these are intricately linked, and let's work towards a better future based on the ancient Indian strategic wisdom. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.